People who read a lot can usually spot a work by one of their favourite authors, since most writers have a style that is unique to them. This is certainly not true of King Solomon, the son of King David. Solomon contributed the majority of 3 books to the scriptures. First, we have the majority of the book of Proverbs. Solomon had asked God for wisdom, and Proverbs gives his thoughts and reflections from the wisdom that God has granted him. We have the Song of Solomon, one of the greatest pieces of love poetry ever written. His third and final book is Ecclesiastes, which I think could be subtitled Cynical Reflections of an Old Man, written with some bitterness and much disappointment as he looks back at life primarily from a secular point of view. Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes near the end of his life at about 935 BC. There is almost a dialogue between Solomon looking at life from a merely earthly perspective, or as he calls it, under the sun, and then Solomon who receives special revelation from God and tells us how to live in the light of that reality. Solomon addresses some of life's biggest questions. How can I really matter? Where can we find true intimacy, or can we? What is a healthy balance in life? Why are we here? Can we understand why things happen the way they do? Does life have meaning? It's a great book for those who want to think deeply about life. In particular, the book reflects on 3 key lessons. The lure of something better tomorrow will rob us of joys offered today. Personal temptation to escape is always stronger than the realization of its consequence. And the final destination, if God is absent from the scene, will never satisfy. In the first verse, Solomon introduces himself as the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Then in verse 2 he sets the tone for everything that will follow, with the well-known phrase, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The word vanity here means emptiness, pointlessness, meaningless, worthlessness. And the preacher decides at an early stage that everything is futile in this world. Everything seems to be cyclical, repetitive and pointless. No permanent impact is ever made on the world. Everything just continues on as it always has been. People are typically unhappy. History repeats itself over and over again. We may have new technology, but human nature still leads to the same sorts of things over and over. Our impact for good upon our descendants is extremely limited. We may understand more, but we also experience more emotional pain. We look to many things to enrich our lives: pleasure, education, science, work, relationships, philosophy. None of these things meet our deepest needs. In fact, Solomon tells us that the wiser and smarter we are, the more we may feel disappointed with life, as we perhaps understand what is lacking with a greater intensity. It feels that we have a choice between depth and the pain that sometimes goes with it, or superficiality and the ignorant bliss that accompanies it. We have expectations that are not met, and we find ourselves unable to satisfy our deepest longings. Feeling our disappointment, we attempt to deal with that by denial, avoidance, distraction or projection. Solomon does give us an alternative: face reality, process reality, and then look beyond that reality to God and eternity, and so enjoy the legitimate pleasures of life. The teacher is primarily a realistic observer who reports the ups and downs as he encounters them. As well as vanity or vanity of vanities, there's another term, under the sun, which cannot escape our notice as we read Ecclesiastes. It occurs 29 times in the book, but nowhere else in the Bible. In particular, he states there is nothing new under the sun. In contrast to human life under the sun, the teacher gives glimpses of God in heaven. Our time is fleeting, but whatever God does endures forever. These glimpses begin to give us an understanding of the character of God, which will help us make sense of life. The teacher, nonetheless, proceeds to explore various possibilities for trying to live life well. He considers achievement, pleasure, wisdom, wealth, timing, friendship, and finding joy in God's gifts. In some of these he does find a certain value, yet nothing seems permanent, and the characteristic conclusion in each section is that work comes to chasing after wind, another phrase he uses frequently. First, the teacher explores achievement. Solomon was what we would call an overachiever, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And what did all his achievement mean to him? Well, not a lot. His conclusion is, it is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. I saw all the deeds that are done under the sun, and all is vanity and a chasing after wind. No lasting achievement even seems possible. He continues by saying, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Achieving his goals did not give him happiness, for it only made him realise how hollow and limited anything he could accomplish must be. The teacher moves on. Come now, I will make a test of pleasure. Enjoy yourself. He acquires wealth, houses, gardens, alcohol, slaves, jewellery, entertainment, and ready access to sexual pleasure. In fact, he admitted himself, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. Unlike with achievement, he finds some value in seeking pleasure, stating, my heart found pleasure, and this was my reward. Nevertheless, working merely to gain pleasure is ultimately unsatisfying. This yields the repeated assessment that, again, all was vanity and a chasing after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Solomon describes his efforts to escape life's despair through pleasure and self-indulgence. He lists all the things he tried to make himself happy, claiming, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. Solomon fashioned an environment of pleasure, and in the process he discovered that this was not for the highest good. People try to escape reality, trying things that don't truly meet their needs. The result of Solomon's experiment? Escape through pleasure doesn't work. At best, it offers a temporary relief from the distresses of life. Solomon then attempts to find meaning through work. He built up his kingdom. He worked hard, but it wasn't enough. Solomon also concedes that achieving greatness and power is futile. When I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. What if we don't attain all our career goals? What is the true meaning of our worth? Some people reach the end of their days only to conclude, so what? They've been toiling without a sense of direction. We should all end our days hoping to hear the words from Jesus, well done, my good and faithful servant. King Solomon's home took 14 years to build, and he built houses for his many wives. None of this brought him happiness. It all was, at best, a diversion. He admits, I hated life. His accomplishments weren't enough. We can't enjoy the things money can buy unless we possess the things that money can't buy. Solomon then asks, what does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labours under the sun? We live, we work, we play, and then what? Nothing we've accomplished matters unless we're trusting in God's purpose. A wealthy corporate executive died, and somebody inevitably asked, how much did he leave? The answer, all of it. We can boast, I did it my way. But in the end, what do we have? Solomon states, a man can do nothing to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. Job satisfaction comes from God's hands, a sense of divine calling, in knowing that we're doing God's will, fulfilling his purpose in our lives. We have a reason to work hard and in an ethical manner, because we're not merely serving a corporation, we're serving God. Maybe Ecclesiastes is a call for us to redefine success. We are restless until we find our rest and purpose in God. We trust the finite gods of pleasure and work. We seek economic security. We lack peace and purpose. God offers eternal security and meaningful life. Ecclesiastes assures us, to the man who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. When we surrender our plans and lives to God, he gives our lives meaning. Put a relationship with God into the picture, and everything changes. Perhaps it's good to seek an object outside of work itself, but a higher objective is needed than pleasure. So the teacher reports, I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. Unlike achievement for achievement's sake, wisdom can at least be attained to some degree. The teacher says, I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. But other than filling the head with exalted thoughts, it makes no real difference in life, because the wise die just like fools. Pursuing wisdom led the teacher to the brink of despair. The teacher concludes, all is vanity, the chasing after wind. Then the teacher turns to wealth. What about the accumulation of wealth as the higher purpose? This turns out to be worse than spending wealth to gain pleasure. Wealth brings the problem of inheritance. When you die, the wealth you accumulated will pass to someone else, who may be completely undeserving. Sometimes one who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave all to be enjoyed by another who did not toil for it. This is vanity and a great evil. The conclusion of vanity is no surprise, but the claim of great evil is certainly strong language. This is so galling that the teacher says, I turned and gave my heart up to despair. At this point we get our first glimpse of the character of God. God is a giver. To the one who pleases him, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. This aspect of God's character is repeated several times in Ecclesiastes, and his gifts listed in the book include food, drink and joy, wealth and possessions, honour, integrity, the world we inhabit and life itself. The teacher does not find satisfaction in giving wealth any more than in gaining it. Unless there is indeed a higher purpose beyond anything the teacher discovers, the accumulation and distribution of wealth also is vanity and a chasing after wind. If work has no single, unchanging purpose, perhaps it has a myriad of purposes, each meaningful in its own time. The teacher explores this in the chapter beginning, For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. Probably the best known chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. The key is that every activity is governed by time. At one moment it is right to mourn and wrong to dance. At another moment the opposite is true. None of these activities or conditions is permanent. We are creatures of this world going through changes and seasons of time. This is another hard lesson. We deceive ourselves about the fundamental nature of life if we think our labours can bring about permanent peace, prosperity, or happiness. There is indeed a time to build up. Someday everything we have built will rightly be torn down. If our work has any eternal value, the teacher sees no sign of it under the sun. Our condition is doubly difficult in that we are creatures of the moment, but with a sense of past and future in our minds. Thus the teacher longs for that which has permanent value, even though he cannot find it. But the teacher does not despair, for time is a gift from God himself. God has made everything suitable for its time. It's right to cry at the funeral of a loved one, and it's good to rejoice at the birth of a child. We should not refuse legitimate pleasures. There is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Moreover, it is God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in all their work. We get two glimpses of God's character. First, God is awesome, eternal, omniscient, so that all should stand in awe of him. Although we are limited by the conditions of life under the sun, God is not. The theological name for this idea is the transcendence of God. The second glimpse shows us that God is a God of justice. The teacher says God seeks out what has gone by, and God will judge the righteous and the wicked. We may not see God's justice in the apparent unfairness of life, but the teacher assures us it will come to pass. God has given the gift of time to every person, at every place, for each evolving time. God has given us yesterday, today, maybe tomorrow. Therefore make today count. He's appointed everything appropriate in its time. So you have a choice to worry or not to worry. You should profit from your work. It is the thing that defines your life. Solomon declares, I have seen the task which God has given. God has a task or plan for every life. The teacher then says that God has set eternity in our hearts. He's given us the ability to look beyond our life of today. He expects us to do good with our work. Nothing better than to rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. God gives to all people the ability to appreciate the good of their work. Every man can see good in all his labour. It is the gift of God. God wants us to find enjoyment in our life. Eat and drink. It is the gift of God. Time changes us, but God never changes, nor does he change his purpose with us. Solomon tells us everything God does will remain forever. It's easy to doubt because of crime, corruption, wars, accidents, and bad things happening to good people. But God is in control. He has a purpose. God allows persecution, suffering, and pain to grow our maturity. God uses good and evil to glorify himself. In the light of all this, how are we to live? Make every day count. Enjoy yourself. It's okay to have fun. Remember that God has made beautiful things for us to enjoy. Everything has a purpose. Our challenge is to try to find that purpose. Of course, this is particularly challenging, but no less true. In cases of pain, sickness, accidents, storms, recessions, wars, and death, wait with patience for God's future revelation of his purpose for your life. Trust God in everything. Above all, never forget God still loves you. The Bible is still true. God still listens to prayers, and he knows your problems. Perhaps relationships offer real meaning. The teacher extols the value of friendships. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward. Building good relationships requires openness and a desire to learn from others. The teacher's exploration of friendship is more upbeat than his earlier explorations. Yet, even so, friendships are necessarily temporary. The teacher likens it to a new young king whose subjects receive him gladly at first, but whose popularity drops as a new generation of youth comes to regard him as just another old king. In the end, neither career advancement nor fame offer satisfaction. As so often, Solomon reaches his standard conclusion. Surely it is also vanity and a chasing after wind. The teacher's search for meaning in life ends with many short lessons. First, listening is wiser than speaking. The teacher advises, therefore, let your words be few. Second, keep your promises, above all to God. Third, expect the government to be corrupt. How often are we troubled by our own government and speak as if this is a new problem? Well, it is at least 3,000 years old, and Solomon warns, if you see the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and right, do not be amazed at the matter. Fourth, obsession for wealth is an addiction, and like any other addiction, it consumes those it afflicts, yet it does not satisfy. Fifth, wealth is fleeting. It may disappear in this life, but it certainly will disappear at death. Don't build your life on it. In the midst of this section, the teacher explores again the gift of God in allowing us to enjoy our work and the wealth, possessions and honour it may bring for a time. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of life God gives us. Although the enjoyment is fleeting, it is real. This joy comes not from striving more successfully than others, but from receiving life and work as a gift from God. If joy in our work does not come as a gift of God, it doesn't come at all. We see plainly that all lives end in the grave, at which stage it appears that the life lived wisely comes to nothing greater than the life lived foolishly. It is better to see this plainly than to try to live a fairy tale illusion. Better in the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. But the end result of our lives remain vanity and a chasing after wind. However we live our lives, it will end with death. Ecclesiastes therefore recommends that we spend some serious time in the cemetery. It's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of everyone, and the living will lay it to heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Because our time is short, we cannot find out what impact we may have on the world. Solomon says that we cannot even find out why today is different from yesterday, let alone what tomorrow may bring. It makes sense to enjoy whatever good comes from our work while we can, for God has made the one as well as the other, so that mortals may not find out anything that will come after them. Solomon describes the better things that come to the life of a person who has followed God's wisdom. A good reputation is more valuable than the most expensive perfume. A good name is that which has influence and character, that which changes lives. If a person dies with a good name, his reputation is sealed and the family need not worry. In that sense, the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon had written, "A good name is to be more desired than great wealth, favour than gold and silver." It is better to spend your time at funerals than at festivals, for you are going to die, and it's a good thing to think about it while there is still time. Many people try to avoid confrontations with the reality of death, and as a result do not take life as seriously as they should. The psalmist said, "So teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom." To be in the presence of sickness or death has a tendency to bring us quickly to the really crucial issues of life. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has refining influence upon us. Yes, a wise man thinks much of death, while the fool thinks only of having a good time now. Sorrow shared may bring more inner happiness and deep peace than an evening of mutual admiration and shared fun. A wise person's rebuke will accomplish far more in our lives than the flattery of fools. If we're in earnest about God's good plan, we must be ready for serious conversation with men and women who are experienced in life and be open to criticism from these. The end is better than the beginning. Beware of easy routes. They often become expensive detours that are difficult and painful. The long haul is better than the shortcut. Today is better than yesterday. Yesterday is past and cannot be changed. Tomorrow may not come at all. So make the most of today. This does not mean that we shouldn't learn from the past or prepare for the future, because both are important. It means that we must live in the will of God and not be paralysed by yesterday or hypnotised by tomorrow. So we must try to act now according to the good. Yet, can we really know whether any action we take is wholly good or wholly evil? When we imagine we are acting righteously, wickedness may creep in and vice versa. The teacher declares, "Surely there is no one on earth so righteous as to do good without ever sinning." The truth of good and evil, he adds, is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? The best we can do is to fear God, although Solomon adds, God made human beings straightforward, and they have devised many schemes. Ecclesiastes is a book that gives us a harsh dose of reality, a reality that most of us have lived through from time to time. Solomon makes it known to us that he has seen situations where bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. Solomon describes how he has seen a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and a wicked man who prolongs his life in his wickedness. And it's very tempting to think, well, that's not fair. By coming to that conclusion, you're passing judgment on the righteousness and fairness of God. So often people today say, I can't believe in a God who would allow war and suffering and injustice to take place in the world. If I were God, I would do it differently. People who make statements like this are placing their own righteousness and wisdom above God's. That's the way of ruin. We need to rediscover the fear of the Lord. We don't talk that much these days about fearing God, but we should. That's where real wisdom begins. When we don't fear God, we don't fear the consequences of sin. Solomon tried to look for the qualities of wisdom, as well as their opposites through rationalisation and observation. His findings were few and far between. The outcome of his search is that wisdom is rare. So why then is wisdom so rare? It's because we've been blinded by sin. Why do we sin? It wasn't because we were created that way. It's because we've turned from God to seek out other things. We're not who we were created to be, and the root is sin. Solomon returns to his earlier theme of power and authority. The exercise of power is a fact of life. We have a duty to obey those in authority over us. Yet we do not know whether they will use their authority justly. Quite possibly, they will use their power to harm others. Justice is perverted. The righteous are punished, and the wicked are rewarded. In the midst of this uncertainty, the best that we can do is to fear God, and to enjoy the opportunities for happiness that God gives us. I commend enjoyment, for there is nothing better for people under the sun than to eat and drink and enjoy themselves, for this will go with them in their toil through the days of life that God gives them under the sun. Solomon then reaches a very similar conclusion as to that for wisdom. No one can find out what is happening under the sun. However much they may toil in seeking, they will not find it out. Even though those who are wise claim to know, they cannot find it out. This brings to an end the teacher's search to find out what is good to do with the limited time that we have. Although he's discovered some good practices, the overall result is that he could not find out what is truly meaningful. We all have some regrets in life, but what do most people near the end of their life regret the most? The common answer is, I wish I hadn't spent so much of my life worrying. Accept that your control is limited. The unpredictability of life might scare us, but controlling people are not well balanced. God is sovereign over all. Time and chance happen to all. Choose to be a person of substance rather than image alone. Never forget, man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Perhaps it would be possible to work out what is best to do in life. If it were possible to know that what comes afterwards, but the teacher finds it is simply not possible to know what lies ahead. He says many things on that subject, all of which reach the same basic conclusion. The dead know nothing. There is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which they are going. Man does not know his time. The sons of men are ensnared in an evil time. It suddenly falls on them. No one knows what is to happen. Who can tell anyone what the future holds? You do not know what disaster may happen on earth. You do not know which will prosper, this or that, whether both alike will be good. One of the best known verses of the book is in chapter 9. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. Although we cannot know the final result of our work, there's no point in letting this paralyze us. So the encouragement is to throw ourselves wholeheartedly into our work. Solomon says that we should accept success and failure as a part of life. We should not fool ourselves into thinking either that our success is due to our own merits, or that our failure is due to our own shortcomings. I saw that, under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor the bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favour to the skilful. But time and chance happen to them all. Success or failure may be due to chance. That's not to say that hard work and ingenuity aren't important. They prepare us to make the most of the chances of life, and they may create opportunities that otherwise wouldn't exist. Chapter 10 gives the most direct financial advice to be found anywhere in the Bible. Be diligent, otherwise your household economy will collapse like a leaky, rotten roof. Understand that in this life, financial well-being does matter. The phrase, money meets every need, can be read in a cynical manner, but the text does not say that money is the only thing that matters. The point is simply that money is necessary for dealing with all kinds of issues. Solomon then warns us to be careful about people in authority. If you belittle your boss and even someone else, you may live to regret it. His next advice is to diversify your investments. Send out your bread upon the waters. It does not refer to charitable giving, but to investments. In this case, the waters represent a venture in overseas trading. Thus, giving portions to 7 or 8 refer to diverse investments, for you do not know what disaster may happen on earth. Solomon says don't be overly timid about investing. What will happen, will happen. You can't control that. But this should not frighten us into putting money under a mattress where it yields nothing. Instead, we should find the courage to take reasonable risks. Whoever observes the wind will not plant. Whoever regards the clouds will not reap. Understand that success is in God's hands, but you don't know what plans or purposes He has, so don't try to second guess Him. Finally, Solomon says, don't work hard for a little while and then say, I tried that and it doesn't work. Working wholeheartedly, accepting success and failure as part of life, and working diligently and investing wisely are good practices. They are merely adaptations to deal with our ignorance on the future. If we truly knew how our actions would play out, we could plan confidently for success. If we knew which investments would turn out well, we would not need to diversify as a hedge against systematic losses. It's hard to know whether to hang our heads in sorrow for the disasters that may befall us in this fallen world, or to praise God that it is still possible to muddle through, maybe even do well in such a world. The teacher concludes with a poem exhorting the young to good cheer and recounting the troubles of old age. There's much good to be found in our life and work, but ultimately it is all fleeting. The teacher closes as he began. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher, all is vanity. There follows an epilogue about, rather than by, the teacher. It praises his wisdom and repeats his admonition to fear God. It adds new elements not found earlier in the book, namely the wisdom of following God's commandments in the light of God's future judgment. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of everyone. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including the secret thing, whether good or evil. God's future judgment is seen as the key to sorting out the mix of good and evil that pervades life. The glimpse of God's character that we have seen in this book, God's generosity, justice, and transcendence beyond the confines of the world, depict an underlying goodness in the foundations of the world. If we could only live accordingly. It begins to hint that in God's time, the tensions so vividly described by the teacher will be brought into a harmony that has not been visible in the teacher's day under the sun. Despite the worst that he sees and experiences, the teacher does not abandon hope in God's world. He finds the moments of joy and sparks of wisdom, and the ways to cope with a fallen world that is ephemeral, not absurd. If God had abandoned humanity to the consequences of the fall, there would be no meaning and no good in life at all. Instead, the teacher finds that there is both meaning and good. His complaint is that they are always transitory, incomplete, uncertain, limited. Given the alternative, a world completely without God, these are actually signs of hope. These signs of hope may be a comfort to us in our darkest experiences of life. If we can imagine enduring the difficulties we experience without the promise of Christ's redemption, then we can gain a glimpse of the burden life may be to those who have never trusted in Christ. We should pray to God that this will at least give us more compassion. Perhaps it will also give us a more effective witness. For if we are to bear witness to Christ's good news, we must start by entering the reality of those to whom we bear witness. Otherwise, our witness is meaningless, glib, self-serving, and vain. The brilliance of Ecclesiastes may be precisely that it is so upsetting. Life is upsetting, and Ecclesiastes faces life honestly. We need to be upset when we become too accommodated to life under the sun, too dependent on the comforts that we find in situations of prosperity and ease. We also need to be upset when we fall into cynicism and despair because of the hardships we face. Whenever we make an idol of the transitory achievements of our life and the arrogance it produces within us, and conversely, whenever we fail to recognize the transcendent meaning of our existence and the value of the people we live among, we need to be upset. Ecclesiastes may be uniquely capable of upsetting us to the glory of God. The teacher gives positive exhortations. He encourages humans to enjoy their vain lives and activities to the fullest. People must embrace the unforeseen chances of life, since caution only impedes God's providence. He urges young people to remain happy and to follow their inclinations, reminding them to always remember God. The things of earth are only temporary, and life is a cycle that eventually returns to God. The teacher also warns the reader against heeding too many wise sayings, for the study of wisdom never ends. The end of the matter, he concludes, is for humans to fear God and to obey his commandments. Solomon wasted much of his efforts on material treasures. This would produce a loss of focus on what was important. He learned to build covenant relationships with other kingdoms by using marriage and then to have children. After the marriage, Solomon would have children. The other king would never attack because his grandchildren were with Solomon. The children became a buffer zone of safety for Solomon. Solomon never had to trust the Lord for his safety. He trusted in the arm of the flesh, and this would be a costly mistake. False gods would soon move into Solomon's backyard, and sadly, Solomon would find his heart turning away from God's plan for him. He chased many rainbows that left him with sad words, vanity of vanities. All is vanity. If you base your life on the invalid, everything appears to become invalid. Ecclesiastes shows the search for the meaning of life. This search led Solomon further and further from his Creator. Solomon soon has more interest in the creature than the Creator. Solomon's search led him closer to emotions and feelings and the pursuit of things. And soon Solomon sees no purpose in life. Solomon has been searching. He searched for wisdom. The conclusion: much study is a weariness of flesh. He searched for pleasure, and that was vanity. He searched for a substance to alter the mind. Give yourself to wine, that is folly. We need internal change. He searched for materialism. I made great gifts, I built, I planted, I had great possessions. Although everyone else was impressed, Solomon was empty. Things and toys are a poor measuring stick of real success. He searched for authority, power, influence, leadership. Nothing really worked. He searched for security. We all seek for a life free from worry, fear and anxiety. But how much is enough? He searched music and entertainment. Solomon had a rich heritage in music. His father, David, could play and write music. Solomon was probably a skilled musician. He gathered around him the most skilled, elite musicians of his day. The professional skills were entertaining, but life is more than acting. Are we looking for our purpose or for God's purpose? Has life lost its meaning? Has ministry become a drag? Perhaps we've lost our focus. Real meaning comes from great effort and trials. We are not to worship the creation, but the Creator. Some of Solomon's last words penned were, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, every secret thing, whether good or whether evil." Solomon concluded that what God wants more than anything is pure devotion. His desire for us is a life of worship and obedience. Obedience is not based on rules, but on relationship. How can we obey? By focusing on the commander and not commands. We can obey God because we can trust him. Acknowledge when obedience is hard. Everyone is going to blow it sometime. Seek and accept input from other believers. Develop a life of transparency. Confess and repent when you fall short. Disobedience today does not require disobedience tomorrow. If you would like to know more, then contact us at any of the contact addresses given on this slide. Or if you're ever in the Radstock area on a Sunday morning, why not come along to the Baptist Church for our 10:30 service? You will always be very welcome.